May 25, 1941, North Atlantic, 500 nautical miles south of Cape Farewell, Greenland. The young midshipman's hand trembled as he gripped the periscope handles, not from fear of the enemy above, but from what he had just heard echo through the steel hull of U-557. A metallic ping, sharp and unnatural, had struck the submarine's hull and reverberated through every compartment. Fritz zur See Herbert Werner would later write in his private journal, "Discovered decades after the war, the sound was like nothing we had trained for. It rang through our boat like a church bell announcing our funeral. The British had found us beneath the waves." For 3 years, German U-boat crews had operated with near impunity, believing the ocean depths provided sanctuary from enemy detection. They had been taught that submerging meant disappearing, that the dark waters would cloak them as effectively as night cloaked a surface raider. On this spring morning in 1941, 22-year-old Werner and 48 other men aboard U-557 learned a terrifying truth. The ocean no longer hid them. The Allies possessed technology that could see through water itself. What none of these submariners understood was that this single ping represented the opening movement of a technological symphony that would transform submarine warfare forever, the SAW, technology that had made submarines the most feared. Weapons of the last war had now been countered by new technology that made them targets. The balance had shifted decisively, and there was nothing German engineering or German courage could do to shift it back. The spring of 1943 brought the climactic crisis of the Battle of the Atlantic. In March, German U-boats sank 120 merchant ships, nearly 700,000 tons of shipping, at the cost of only 12 submarines. Nearly two-thirds of these sinkings occurred within convoys, the very foundation of Allied maritime defense. For 20 days that March, Admiral Dönitz's wolf packs came closer to severing Britain's Atlantic lifeline than at any other point in the war. The Royal Navy's official history later concluded that the Germans never came so near to disrupting communications between the New World and the Old. But March 1943 marked the peak of U-boat effectiveness, not the beginning of renewed dominance. The technological and tactical balance was shifting decisively. Allied shipyards, particularly in the United States, were producing escort vessels faster than they could be sunk. Destroyer escorts, corvettes, and frigates, all equipped with improved sonar systems, began flooding into the Atlantic in massive numbers. Very long-range Liberator aircraft, carrying both radar and sonobuoys, finally closed the mid-Atlantic air gap where U-boats had once operated beyond land-based patrols. May 1943 became Black May for the Kriegsmarine. 41 U-boats were destroyed, fully a quarter of operational strength. On May 24th, Admiral Dönitz, stunned by the catastrophic losses, ordered a temporary withdrawal of U-boats from the North Atlantic. In his war diary, he wrote, "We are facing a situation where enemy attempts to restrict our operations have succeeded. Their sea and air anti-submarine forces have increased enormously. Our losses have become unsustainable." The statistics told a brutal story. In the first 3 weeks of May, 96 U-boats were deployed in the North Atlantic. 41 were destroyed. 43% never returned to port. For comparison, the entire year of 1941 had seen only 35 U-boat losses from all causes. Black May destroyed more submarines in 3 weeks than an entire year of early war operations. The exchange rate had become catastrophic. 12 merchant ships sunk for every U-boat lost. 2 years earlier, the ratio had been 10 merchant ships sunk per U-boat per patrol, most boats returning safely. Now, submarines were being destroyed faster than they could sink their targets. Individual boat losses told the human story behind the numbers. U-463, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Leo Wolfbauer, was detected by ASDIC on May 5th while stalking convoy ONS-5. The destroyer Vedette obtained a firm contact and held it despite the U-boat's evasive maneuvers. For 3 hours, Wolfbauer tried every tactic in the German manual, diving deep, changing course, altering speed, releasing bubble decoys, but nothing worked. The ASDIC contact never wavered. Finally, with batteries nearly exhausted and the boat taking damage from near-miss depth charges, Wolfbauer surfaced to fight with his deck gun. Vedette's 4-inch guns found the range quickly. U-463 was destroyed within minutes. 46 men died. 3 survived at U-192, commanded by Oberleutnant Werner Hoppe, was hunted for 6 hours by escorts from convoy SC-129 on May 6th. The boat dove to 300 meters, far beyond its design limits. The hull groaned and popped under pressure. Leaks appeared throughout the compartments. Still, the sonar pings found them. The escorts coordinated perfectly, one ship maintaining ASDIC contact while the others moved into attack position. When the depth charges came, they were set with deadly precision, exploding exactly at 300 meters. The pressure hull cracked. Seawater poured in. Of 44 men aboard, only 8 escaped the sinking boat. 4 drowned before rescue. U-531, a new vessel on her first patrol, was detected the same day by an RAF Liberator equipped with airborne radar and depth charges, technology that now reached into what had once been the U-boat's safest refuge, the mid-Atlantic. The aircraft surprised the submarine on the surface at night, once the safest time for U-boat commanders. The Liberator's lee light flared suddenly, flooding the sea with blinding white light from half a mile away. Depth charges fell before the crew could dive. The submarine was damaged but remained afloat. Surface escorts homed in on the radar contact, obtained ASDIC range, and finished the kill with a coordinated attack. There were no survivors: U-194, U-125, U-438, U-657, U-273. The list grew longer each day. Some boats were destroyed by aircraft, others by surface escorts. Many were hunted by combinations of both, working in perfect coordination. Yet nearly all were first detected by radar or sonar. The technological advantage had shifted so decisively that German submarines could scarcely operate. For the crews still at sea during Black May, the psychological toll was immense. Radio traffic told of boat after boat failing to return. Friends and classmates disappeared beneath the waves. The ocean, once a German hunting ground, had become a killing field, where U-boats were the prey, and always, constantly, there was the pinging. The sonar pulses that pierced the deep, echoing through steel hulls, reminding every man aboard that invisibility was gone. Detection was certain. Death was probable. U-boat command tried to maintain operational effectiveness through denial, issuing optimistic reports, promising new tactics, new weapons, new hope. But the men who heard the pings knew better. Orders from Berlin insisted the losses were only temporary setbacks. New tactics were transmitted to boats still at sea. Commanders were told to persevere, that the tide would turn. But the men inside the submarines knew better. They had felt the relentless tracking of ASDIC. They had survived depth charge barrages that seemed to find their exact position. They had watched comrades die when pressure hulls cracked under precisely placed explosions. No amount of propaganda could erase those experiences. Oberleutnant Werner, by now commanding his own boat, U-415, experienced the new reality firsthand. In his memoir, he described a patrol in April 1943. We were detected within hours of reaching our operational area. For 3 days, escorts hunted us relentlessly. Their sonar never lost contact. We dove to maximum depth, 300 meters. The hull groaned. Rivets popped. Still, the pinging found us. When we tried to escape on the surface at night, aircraft appeared with searchlights. There was no sanctuary left. We had become targets in a shooting gallery. Werner's patrol aboard U-415 would be among his shortest and most harrowing. The boat departed La Pallice on April 10, 1944, assigned to patrol the western approaches to the English Channel. Werner knew the mission was nearly suicidal. Allied air and sea patrols had turned the Bay of Biscay crossing into a nightmare. Submarines could no longer surface safely, even at night. The new snorkel breathing tube allowed diesel engine operation while submerged, but Allied radar could detect even this small protrusion above the waves. U-415 made it through the Bay of Biscay by remaining submerged for 18 hours at a stretch. When the boat finally reached open Atlantic waters on April 15th, Werner surfaced briefly to recharge the batteries fully. Within 20 minutes, an RAF Liberator appeared on the horizon. The aircraft had detected U-415's radar emissions before Werner's lookouts even sighted the plane. The submarine crash-dived with seconds to spare. Depth charges exploded astern, damaging the after torpedo tube, but leaving the boat operational. For the next 60 hours, U-415 remained submerged, running on electric motors, creeping away from the patrol area at 3 knots. Werner knew that Allied hunter-killer groups coordinated their searches with ruthless precision. An aircraft detection would inevitably summon surface escorts to the area. Sure enough, on April 18th, the first ASDIC pings began. Faint at first, then growing louder, echoing through the steel hull. An escort had picked up their trail. Werner took the boat down to 250 meters and slowed to silent running speed. The pinging continued. The escort above had solid contact and held it, hour after hour. Werner tried every evasive technique in the manual. He altered course by 90 degrees. The pinging followed. He increased speed briefly, then slowed again, hoping to confuse the ASDIC operator. The pinging intensified, a sure sign the escort was closing. He released a Pillenwerfer bubble decoy. The contact never wavered. The Allied operator was too experienced to be fooled. He knew the difference between a decoy's hollow echo and the unmistakable signature of a submarine. After 8 hours of continuous tracking, the depth charges began to fall. The patterns were frighteningly accurate. Explosions rumbled at precisely 250 meters, the exact depth where U-415 was running. Werner took the boat deeper still to 300 meters. The hull creaked and groaned under the strain. Paint flaked from the bulkheads. Rivets wept under pressure. Every man aboard knew the boat was nearing its limits. The hull groaned continuously. Men stood rigid at their stations, faces pale with fear. The attack went on through the night and into the next morning. Werner's crew was exhausted. The boat's batteries were nearly depleted. The air had become thick, foul, and dangerously low in oxygen. He faced an impossible choice: surface and fight, certainly dying under the escort's guns. Remain submerged until the batteries failed, then surface and surrender. Or try to outlast the hunter, hoping it would run low on fuel or depth charges. Werner chose to wait. For 16 hours, U-415 crept silently through the depths, while death circled above. Finally, the pinging stopped. The escort had expended its last charges and departed. Werner waited 4 more hours before daring to surface. When he did, the ocean was empty. The boat limped back toward France. Mission aborted, crew traumatized, U-415 never made another war patrol. She was sunk in her bunker at Toulon by Allied air attack in July 1944. Werner survived only because he was ashore when the bombs fell. The technological gap was widening. By mid-1943, Allied escorts carried not only improved sonar, but an entire integrated anti-submarine warfare system. High-frequency direction finding, nicknamed Huff-Duff by its operators, could triangulate U-boat radio transmissions with astonishing precision. Radar could detect surface submarines at night or in fog. Sonobuoys dropped from aircraft created underwater listening networks that monitored vast stretches of ocean. Ahead-throwing weapons like Hedgehog and Squid projected depth charge patterns forward while maintaining sonar contact, eliminating the dead zone that had once allowed submarines to escape. The integration of these systems created a detection network greater than the sum of its parts. A typical convoy by mid-1943 was protected by 6 to 8 escorts, each equipped with ASDIC, radar, and Huff-Duff. Aircraft from Iceland, Britain, or escort carriers provided continuous air cover. The mid-Atlantic gap, where U-boats had once operated beyond air patrols, had been closed by very long-range liberators flying from Newfoundland and Northern Ireland. Every square mile of ocean a convoy crossed was now covered by multiple overlapping sensor systems. When a U-boat approached, detection was almost inevitable. If it transmitted a radio signal to coordinate with other submarines, Huff-Duff triangulated its position and escorts converged. If it surfaced at night to shadow the convoy, radar detected it and aircraft attacked. If it submerged to approach underwater, ASDIC picked it up. The submarine now had only 3 choices. All bad: remain distant and unable to strike, close on the surface and be destroyed by aircraft, or close submerged and be destroyed by escorts. The Hedgehog weapon system revolutionized anti-submarine warfare. Earlier depth charge attacks required escorts to pass directly over a submarine, dropping charges astern and losing ASDIC contact in the final moments of the run. Hedgehog changed that. It fired 24 small bombs forward in an elliptical pattern, while the escort maintained sonar contact throughout the attack. Each projectile carried 35 pounds of Torpex explosive, armed only on contact with a hard surface. If all 24 missed, they sank silently to the bottom without exploding, allowing the escort to fire another salvo immediately. But if even one bomb struck the submarine's hull, the impact detonated nearby bombs, creating a devastating cluster of explosions capable of cracking pressure hulls and destroying the target outright. German submarine commanders quickly learned to fear Hedgehog attacks. Unlike conventional depth charges, which exploded regardless of success, Hedgehog provided instant feedback. Silence meant a miss. Explosions meant a hit, and hits were almost always fatal. The psychological effect was profound. Depth charge attacks, though terrifying, could often be survived even when detonations were close. Hedgehog attacks offered no such hope. The Squid system, introduced in late 1943, was even more deadly. 3 large mortars fired salvos of 3 heavy charges some 250 yards ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike Hedgehog, Squid depth charges were fused to explode at precisely calculated depths, determined automatically by a mechanical computer that processed real-time ASDIC data. The system could even compensate for evasive maneuvers, predicting where the submarine would be when the charges reached detonation. Depth Squid-equipped frigates achieved kill rates of up to 25% per attack, 5 times higher than conventional depth charge success. Rates. German countermeasures proved woefully inadequate. The Pillenwerfer, a chemical canister that produced bubble clouds to decoy sonar, fooled only inexperienced operators. Veterans quickly learned to distinguish the chaotic echo of bubbles from the solid, consistent return of a steel hull. Within seconds, experienced ASDIC men could ignore Pillenwerfer decoys entirely. A more sophisticated device, Bold, officially codenamed Cobalt, released magnesium hydride pellets that generated dense hydrogen bubbles to simulate a submarine's acoustic signature. It, too, provided only fleeting deception. The new Allied systems and skilled operators rendered even these innovations obsolete. Excellent. You've sustained the authoritative tone and fine-grained technical clarity of your earlier section. The description of Bold, Cobalt, and Alberic transitions naturally from decoys to stealth measures, tying together the story of Germany's reactive innovation under pressure. This passage just needs refinement in mechanics, terminology, and flow. For example, ASDIC. ASDIC, correct term. Calcium hydride. Calcium hydride. Wagner. Clarify a few awkward sentences and remove minor redundancies. Enhance rhythm and cohesion while preserving your technical accuracy. Here's a polished version that reads like a finished narrative segment in a history of naval warfare. Revised version: the Bold decoy, known to the Germans as Cobalt, was a 1-meter aluminum-coated balloon filled with calcium hydride. When released from a submerged U-boat, it rose slowly toward shallower depths. There, seawater reacted with the calcium hydride to produce hydrogen gas, maintaining the balloon's neutral buoyancy. To Allied radar, Bold appeared as a possible snorkel. To ASDIC, it returned a convincing echo. But its limitations were severe. It could be deployed only from stationary submarines and rose far too slowly to provide cover during evasive maneuvers. It also drifted vertically rather than horizontally. So any ASDIC operator who maintained contact for more than a few minutes would soon realize that the target was motionless, and therefore not a submarine at all. Desperate for more effective countermeasures, German scientists explored ways to make submarines invisible to sonar rather than merely confusing it. Their most ambitious project was Alberic, named after the dwarf in Wagner's Ring Cycle, who possessed a cloak of invisibility. Alberic was a rubber coating embedded with air bubbles, designed to absorb incoming sonar pulses instead of reflecting them. In theory, the concept was sound. Laboratory tests suggested it could reduce echo strength dramatically. In practice, it failed. To be effective, the coating had to be several centimeters thick, adding dangerous weight and reducing the submarine's speed and buoyancy. It degraded rapidly in seawater and could not withstand the immense pressure changes of deep diving. At depth, the coating compressed, losing its sound-absorbing properties. Upon surfacing, it expanded unevenly, cracking and peeling away. After months of testing on captured U-boats, Allied analysts concluded that Alberic was impractical. German engineers, working under even harsher conditions, reached the same conclusion. The problem ran deeper than any single failed experiment. For 2 decades, German naval research had focused overwhelmingly on pro-submarine technology, improving the U-boat's ability to locate and attack targets, while largely neglecting anti-detection measures. When Allied sonar, radar, and weapon systems reached maturity, Germany had no effective counter. The Kriegsmarine had assumed that future naval warfare would follow the patterns of the past. By 1944, that assumption had become fatal. They had prepared to fight the last war, while the Allies had developed technologies for an entirely new kind of warfare. The human cost mounted with horrifying speed. In September 1942, roughly 3,000 men were at sea aboard operational U-boats. By August 1944, more than 28,000 of the 40,000 who had served in the U-boat arm were dead. The survival rate for German submarine crews had fallen below 30%. Every patrol was a near-certain death sentence, yet the Kriegsmarine continued to send boats out, often with green crews replacing the experienced commanders who had achieved the early victories of the war. Feldwebel Hirschfeld, who transferred to the larger Type 9D submarine U-234 in early 1944, later wrote of the psychological collapse he witnessed among the men. "The new men are terrified before we even leave port. They have heard the statistics. They know that 3 boats out of 4 never return. When the sonar pings begin, some men weep. Others simply shut down, staring at the bulkheads, unable to function. The veterans try to maintain discipline, but we know the truth as well as the novices. We are sailing in iron coffins." The advent of snorkel technology in mid-1944 briefly rekindled hope. The extendable breathing tube allowed U-boats to run their diesel engines while submerged, theoretically enabling them to remain underwater for entire patrols. For a few months, commanders dared to believe that stealth might be restored, but Allied science adapted with relentless speed. Airborne radar sets were recalibrated to detect even the small metallic head of a snorkel protruding above the waves. Sonar grew ever more precise, capable of distinguishing a snorkeling U-boat from the sea clutter around it. Whether charging batteries or creeping silently on electric motors, the submarines were never truly safe. By late 1944, the Atlantic, the vast arena that had once promised Germany mastery through invisibility, had become transparent. The snorkel itself was Dutch technology, captured when Germany occupied the Netherlands in 1940. The original Dutch design was simple: a tube extending above the water surface to provide air to diesel engines, while the submarine operated at periscope depth. German engineers refined the concept, adding automatic valves that closed when waves washed over the snorkel, preventing flooding. They also installed exhaust systems that vented diesel fumes underwater, eliminating the smoke plumes that had once revealed surface submarines for miles. In practice, snorkel operations were miserable. The submarine had to maintain extremely precise depth control, keeping the snorkel head just above the surface. Too deep, and the automatic valve would close, causing the diesel engines to suck air from inside the boat. Crew members suffered agonizing ear pain as the sudden pressure changes struck. Too shallow, and the conning tower would break the surface, making the boat visible to aircraft or surface radar. Rough seas made maintaining depth control nearly impossible. Waves constantly washed over the snorkel head, repeatedly opening and closing the valve. Each closure caused sudden, painful changes in internal pressure, wearing down both crew and machinery. The noise was tremendous. Diesel engines running at full power inside a submerged submarine created a roar that made normal communication impossible. Men had to shout to be heard. The constant vibration rattled every fitting, making sleep impossible. Exhaust fumes leaked into the boat despite German engineering efforts, producing headaches and nausea. After 12 hours of snorkeling, crews were exhausted, sick, and deafened. Worst of all, snorkeling did not provide the invisibility German submariners had hoped for. Allied radar operators learned to detect snorkel heads with increasing reliability. The small radar cross-section was challenging, but aircraft equipped with centimetric radar could pick up returns from the tube, especially in calm seas. Aircraft would then attack with depth charges or homing torpedoes, forcing the submarine deep and curtailing battery charging cycles. Some boats were caught by surface escorts while snorkeling, detected by the acoustic signature of running diesel engines or the wake left by the snorkel tube. Allied operators had become experts at distinguishing genuine submarine contacts from false echoes. Training programs produced thousands of skilled sonar operators capable of identifying target characteristics, estimating submarine type from echo signatures, tracking evasive maneuvers, and directing weapons with lethal precision. The combination of improved equipment and experienced operators created a detection network that German submarines simply could not evade. British and American training. Facilities had standardized ASDIC instruction. New operators spent weeks in classrooms learning acoustic theory, how sound traveled through water, how temperature and salinity affected sonar beams, and how submarine hulls reflected sound waves. They studied recordings of actual submarine echoes, learning to distinguish submarines from whales, wrecks, schools of fish, and thermal layers. They practiced on simulators that recreated hunting scenarios, developing the instant recognition skills needed in combat. By 1944, Allied navies were graduating ASDIC operators whose skills far exceeded those of the early war pioneers who had developed submarine hunting tactics through trial and error. These operators took pride in their work. They competed to achieve the fastest detection times, the longest tracking durations, and the highest percentages of successful attacks. The Royal Navy even published monthly tables ranking ASDIC teams by performance. The best operators were awarded promotions and decorations. Their expertise became legendary. Stories circulated of men who could identify specific submarine types by subtle variations in echo characteristics, who could track evasive maneuvers through temperature layers, and who never lost contact once they acquired it. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic had been decisively won. On the invasion day itself, not a single Allied ship was lost to U-boats during the massive Normandy landings, despite desperate German efforts to interdict cross-channel traffic. The sonar screen maintained by Allied escorts was so tight that any U-boat attempting to approach the invasion fleet was detected immediately and either driven off or destroyed before firing a torpedo, though U-boats sank some ships in the days and weeks. Following the landings, the immediate invasion force crossed the channel unmolested. Admiral Dönitz had ordered every available submarine to attack the invasion fleet. 36 boats were deployed to the English Channel and western approaches. The mission was suicidal and everyone knew it. The shallow channel restricted submarine maneuverability. Allied air supremacy was absolute, with hundreds of aircraft patrolling constantly. Surface escorts numbered in the hundreds, creating overlapping sonar coverage that left no gaps. Yet the order stood: attack the invasion fleet regardless of cost. U-boats equipped with snorkels fared slightly better than those without. U-84, commanded by Uloit Hinda, managed to penetrate close enough to the beaches on June 8th to fire torpedoes at landing craft. The boat survived and withdrew, though relentless ASDIC tracking and depth charges inflicted severe damage. U-984 was one of only 3 boats to successfully attack invasion shipping and survive to report the mission. Most were not so fortunate. U-55 was detected by ASDIC on June 9th while attempting to approach the invasion fleet. The frigate Halstead acquired and maintained contact for 11 hours. The submarine dove deep and ran silent, but Type 147 ASDIC tracked it perfectly in 3 dimensions. When Halstead ran low on depth charges, it called in assistance. The destroyer Eskimo took over, attacking with squid mortars. The second salvo struck U-55 amidships, cracking the pressure hull and sealing the boat's fate. The submarine sank with all 48 hands aboard. U-821 was hunted for 14 hours by multiple escorts on June 10th. The boat tried every evasive tactic, diving to 300 meters, releasing bold decoys, changing course erratically. Nothing worked. The ASDIC contact remained solid. Finally, with batteries nearly exhausted and the air almost unbreathable, Kapitänleutnant Ulrich Nachfuss surfaced to surrender. Allied ships rescued 37 survivors. 12 men had died during the depth charge attacks. The slaughter continued through June and July. Of the 36 U-boats committed to attacking the invasion fleet, 25 were destroyed, 69% losses in 2 months. The survivors limped back to French ports, damaged, traumatized, their missions complete failures. Not a single troopship or major warship had been sunk. A few landing craft and small vessels were hit, but at the cost of hundreds of German submariners and dozens of irreplaceable submarines. The ocean floor off Normandy became littered with U-boat wrecks. Post-war Allied surveys counted 17 hulls in the invasion area, most showing evidence of catastrophic depth charge damage. These wrecks became underwater, memorials to the futility of sending submarines against an enemy. With total sonar and radar superiority, the introduction of the Type Funny Win Elektroboote in the war's final months represented Germany's last desperate attempt to regain underwater supremacy. These revolutionary submarines featured streamlined hulls, massive battery capacity enabling sustained submerged speeds of 17 knots, and sophisticated acoustic quieting. Had they been available in significant numbers in 1943, they might have altered the outcome of the Battle of the Atlantic. But only 2 Type Funny Wine boats completed combat patrols before Germany's surrender, far too few and far too late. The Type 31 represented a radical departure from conventional U-boat design. Earlier submarines were essentially surface ships that could submerge temporarily. The Type 31 was designed to operate primarily underwater, surfacing only when absolutely necessary. Its hull was streamlined like a torpedo, eliminating the deck gun, external torpedo storage, and other protrusions that created drag. Combined with triple the battery capacity of conventional boats, this hydrodynamic design allowed sustained underwater speeds capable of outrunning most surface escorts. The specifications were impressive. A submerged speed of 17 knots could be maintained for 90 minutes, and a cruising speed of 6 knots could be sustained for 3 days without surfacing. The Type 31 could dive to depths of 280 meters, far deeper than Allied depth charges were typically set. Most revolutionary was the hydraulic torpedo reload system. The Type 31 could fire all 6 bow torpedoes, reload and fire again in less than 20 minutes, all while remaining at action stations. German engineers also addressed the sonar detection problem. The Type 31's hull was coated with synthetic rubber tiles designed to absorb ASDIC pulses. The propellers were specially shaped to minimize cavitation noise, and machinery was mounted on rubber isolators to reduce vibration transmission through the hull. The snorkel was improved with better valves and more efficient airflow. In theory, the Type 31 would be much harder to detect and track than conventional U-boats. Production began in late 1943 using prefabrication techniques copied from American shipbuilding practices. Submarines were assembled from 8 sections built in different factories across Germany, then transported to assembly yards for final construction. This modular approach allowed rapid production. 118 Type 31 boats were completed before the war's end, with 4 reaching combat readiness. But the program was plagued by problems stemming from rushed development and scattered production. Quality control suffered badly. Sections from different factories often misaligned, welds cracked under pressure, electrical systems failed, and the hydraulic torpedo system leaked. Most critically, the rubber coating intended to defeat sonar proved unreliable. It degraded in seawater, peeled off during deep dives, and in some conditions actually increased rather than decreased the submarine's acoustic signature. U-2511, commanded by Korvettenkapitän Adalbert Schnee, completed the only genuine Type 31 combat patrol. The boat departed Bergen, Norway on April 30, 1945, just days before Germany's surrender. Schnee's orders were to demonstrate the submarine's capabilities by penetrating Allied patrol lines and reaching the North Atlantic. For 2 weeks, U-2511 operated off the British Isles, evading numerous Allied anti-submarine forces. Schnee detected several potential targets but held fire, following orders to avoid engagement unless circumstances were ideal. The patrol demonstrated both the Type 31's remarkable potential and its enduring limitations. The submarine could indeed outrun escorts when detected. Its underwater endurance was extraordinary, but it was still vulnerable to ASDIC detection. Allied operators adapted quickly to its new acoustic signature. On several occasions, escorts obtained solid contacts and began hunting U-2511. Only the boat's superior underwater speed allowed it to escape. Schnee's patrol report, filed after Germany's surrender, concluded that while the Type 31 was a significant improvement over conventional U-boats, it was not invisible to Allied sonar. Given enough time, Allied forces would have developed tactics and technologies to counter it. U-3008, the only other Type 31 to complete a combat patrol, had an even less impressive record. The boat departed KE on May 1, 1945, tasked with evacuating German personnel from Norway. It surrendered to Allied forces on May 9 without firing a shot. Post-war examination by British and American naval experts revealed the quality control problems that had plagued the program. The rubber coating was peeling in multiple locations. Hydraulic systems leaked and electrical connections were corroded. The boat was operationally capable, but far from the revolutionary weapon German propaganda had promised. For the German submarine crews who survived the war, the memory of sonar detection remained their most persistent nightmare. In post-war interviews and memoirs, veterans consistently returned to the metallic ringing of ASDIC pings striking their hulls. That sound, growing faster as escorts closed in, announced their transformation from hunters into hunted. It marked the end of U-boat invincibility and the beginning of systematic destruction. Herbert Werner, one of only 3 U-boat commanders whose boats survived the war intact, immigrated to the United States in 1957 and became an American citizen. In 1969, he published Iron Coffins, his memoir of submarine warfare. The book's dedication read, "To my fallen comrades who rest in iron coffins at the bottom of the sea." In it, Werner acknowledged a truth that had taken years to accept: that technological mastery, coordination, and relentless adaptation had ended the U-boat's reign and exacted a devastating human cost. We were defeated not primarily by superior courage or numbers, though both played roles, but by technology we did not understand and could not counter. The Allies had learned to see through water. We never developed effective means to hide. Werner's path from defeated enemy to American citizen reflected a transformation that mirrored his wartime experience. After Germany's surrender, he spent 2 years in British prisoner of war camps, working as an interpreter and liaison between Allied authorities and German naval personnel. His fluent English and cooperative attitude earned him early release in 1947. He returned briefly to Germany, but found a nation devastated both physically and psychologically. The submarine service he had known was gone. Bases lay in rubble. Bunkers were filled with scuttled boats, and most of his comrades were dead. In 1952, Werner immigrated to the United States on a technical visa, sponsored by a marine engineering firm that valued his submarine expertise. He settled in Connecticut, working as a consultant on sonar and underwater acoustics. The irony was not lost on him. He was helping improve the very technology that had hunted Germany's U-boats through the Atlantic. In 1957, he became an American citizen, swearing an oath to the nation whose sonar had pursued him beneath the waves. Writing Iron Coffins became Werner's way of processing trauma and honoring the dead. He spent 6 years researching, interviewing survivors, and consulting war diaries and patrol reports. The book, published when he was 49, became an immediate bestseller. American readers were fascinated by the first-hand account of submarine warfare from the enemy's perspective. German readers, particularly veterans, embraced it as honest testimony to their experiences. Unlike much German war literature, which often romanticized or justified service under the Nazi regime, Werner's memoir acknowledged the futility and horror of the U-boat war's final years. Its reception was not universally positive. Some German veterans accused him of exaggerating Allied technological superiority to excuse Germany's defeat. A few American critics suggested he had inflated his own accomplishments and minimized German war crimes. Naval historians debated details and disputed statistics. Yet the core narrative, the story of German submariners encountering Allied sonar technology they could not counter, was accepted as fundamentally accurate. Werner continued working as a marine consultant until his retirement in 1985. Werner gave occasional lectures at the Naval War College and the Submarine School, sharing his experiences with American naval officers. He participated in several historical conferences and documentaries about the Battle of the Atlantic. In his later years, he became an advocate for German-American reconciliation, speaking at veteran organizations and schools about the futility of war and the importance of international cooperation. The statistics tell a stark story. Of approximately 1,160 U-boats commissioned during World War II, 785 were lost. 30,000 submariners died, a casualty rate of 75%, the highest of any military service in the war. The majority of these losses occurred after May 1943, once Allied sonar systems had matured. In the final 18 months of the war, sending a U-boat on patrol was effectively sentencing its crew to death. Wolfgang Hirschfeld, the radio operator who had served on U-109 during the early years, survived the war aboard U-234, which surrendered in May 1945. In his diary's final entry, he wrote, "We who sailed beneath the waves believed ourselves invisible warriors. The enemy taught us that invisibility was an illusion. Their sonar stripped away our sanctuary. In the end, we were simply men trapped in steel tubes waiting for the pinging to find us. It always did." Hirschfeld's survival was itself remarkable. U-234 had departed KE on its final patrol in April 1945, carrying secret cargo bound for Japan. The boat was loaded with advanced weapons, blueprints, technical documents, uranium oxide samples, and 2 Japanese naval officers. The mission was to exchange German technology for Japanese raw materials, particularly rubber and rare metals. But Germany surrendered before the submarine reached Japan. Kapitän Lieutenant Jan Heinrich Fehler, commanding U-234, faced an impossible choice: surrender to the Americans, continue to Japan, or scuttle the boat. Fehler chose surrender, but not before destroying the uranium samples and classified documents. On May 19, 1945, U-234 surfaced off the coast of New Hampshire and radioed its intentions to the United States Navy. The destroyer Sutton escorted the submarine to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, Hirschfeld, and the crew became prisoners of war but were treated with remarkable courtesy by American authorities, who were fascinated by the large Type XD cargo submarine and its unusual cargo. Hirschfeld spent 8 months in an American prisoner of war camp in Maryland. Unlike the brutal conditions in Soviet captivity, where many German POWs died, American camps provided adequate food, medical care, and humane treatment. Hirschfeld worked as an electrician, repaired radios, and taught German to American intelligence officers preparing for occupation duty. He was repatriated to Germany in January 1946. Returning to Hamburg, Hirschfeld found his family's home destroyed by Allied bombing. His father had died in a raid. His mother and sister had survived but were living in a refugee camp. Germany was devastated, divided, and occupied. Hirschfeld worked a series of jobs: electrical work, ship repair, and as a translator for British occupation forces. In the 1950s, he began writing his memoir based on the secret diary he had kept throughout the war. The book was published in Germany in 1972, offering an unsentimental account of U-boat life from a crew member's perspective, rather than that of a commander. Hirschfeld's diary entries from 1942 and 1943 documented the transition from confidence to terror as Allied sonar technology improved. Early entries described successful attacks, narrow escapes, and the camaraderie of the crew. Later entries recorded mounting losses, failed attacks, and the psychological breakdown of men who knew they were being hunted by technology they could not evade. The final entries from 1945 reflected not defiance but resignation. We knew the war was lost. We knew most of us would die, but we kept going because that was what warriors did, even when the cause was hopeless and unjust. The technological lesson was stark. Submarine warfare had fundamentally changed. The introduction of active sonar meant the oceans would never again hide submerged vessels as effectively as they had in the early years of the war. Every navy in the world studied the Battle of the Atlantic, absorbing a brutal education in underwater detection. Post-war submarine development focused on quieting, acoustic signatures, and evading increasingly sensitive sonar systems. The cat-and-mouse game between submarine stealth and detection technology had entered a new phase, one that continues to this day. Modern submarine warfare owes its fundamental principles to the lessons learned in the Atlantic from 1939 to 1945. Every navy invested in quieting technology to reduce sonar signatures. Hull designs emphasized acoustic stealth. Echoic coatings to absorb sonar pulses became standard. Propeller designs minimized cavitation noise, and mechanical systems were isolated on sound-dampening mounts. The goal was always the same: to restore the invisibility that German U-boats had lost when Allied sonar matured. The Soviet Union captured several Type 20 submarines and dozens of German engineers after the war. These became the basis for the Whiskey-class submarines that dominated Soviet naval construction in the 1950s. Soviet naval architects studied every aspect of the Type 20 design, particularly the sound quieting features. They recognized that future submarine warfare would be dominated by the competition between stealth and detection. Soviet submarines incorporated rubber anechoic tiles, improved propeller designs, and machinery isolation systems derived directly from German Type 20 technology. The United States Navy conducted extensive tests on captured U-boats, particularly U-2513 and U-3008. Both Type 20 boats surrendered in May 1945. American engineers were impressed by the streamlined hull form, the large battery capacity, and the hydraulic systems. These features influenced the design of the Tang-class submarines, America's first purpose-built post-war boats. The Tang-class incorporated the teardrop hull shape pioneered by German designers, nearly doubling underwater speed compared to wartime fleet boats. Britain's Royal Navy also tested U-2511 thoroughly, putting it through exercises against escort groups equipped with the latest ASDIC systems. The trials confirmed the value of Type 21 innovations and reinforced the lesson that future submarine Effectiveness would rely as much on acoustic stealth and detection, countermeasures as on armament or crew skill. The results were sobering. Even with improved sonar, detecting and maintaining contact with a fast, quiet, deep-diving submarine was extremely difficult. Exercises demonstrated that Type 21 boats, had they been deployed in significant numbers in 1943, would have posed a severe threat to Allied anti-submarine forces. This realization drove British submarine development for the next decade, culminating in the Porpoise-class boats, which incorporated many Type 21 features. On the detection side, sonar systems grew exponentially more sophisticated. Passive arrays could detect submarines from hundreds of miles. Active sonar evolved into multi-frequency systems capable of defeating most countermeasures. Computer processing allowed automatic target classification. The technological competition between submarine stealth and detection became one of the Cold War's central features, a direct legacy of the Battle of the Atlantic. American sonar development in the 1950s produced revolutionary advances. The SQS-4 sonar, introduced in 1952, could track targets at ranges exceeding 10,000 yards. Variable depth sonar, towed behind surface ships on cables, could be lowered beneath thermal layers to detect deep-running submarines. Sonobuoy networks dropped from aircraft created acoustic fences across strategic choke points. By the 1960s, American anti-submarine forces had developed detection capabilities that exceeded World War II systems by orders of magnitude. Soviet submariners found themselves in the same position German U-boat crews had occupied in 1943, hunted by sonar technology that stripped away their underwater sanctuary. Soviet naval archives released after the Cold War revealed that submarine commanders in the 1960s and 1970s described the psychological impact of Western sonar in terms nearly identical to those used by German veterans. The persistent pinging, the knowledge that the enemy knew their position, and the helplessness of being tracked underwater by invisible technology drove both sides to extremes. Soviet submarines in response became progressively quieter, employing advanced propeller designs, sophisticated rubber coatings, and innovative propulsion systems. American submarines adopted similar technologies while developing even more sensitive passive sonar arrays. The competition reached its apex with nuclear-powered submarines, whose virtually unlimited underwater endurance allowed them to operate submerged for months at a time. But even nuclear boats remained vulnerable to acoustic detection. The fundamental lesson of the Battle of the Atlantic, that sonar could strip away submarine invisibility, remained valid. The human element also remained constant. Submarine crews in all navies understood the lesson German submariners had learned so brutally. Being detected meant being vulnerable. The distinctive ping of active sonar striking a hull triggered the same primal fear in American, British, Soviet, and French submarine crews that it had in German sailors. That sound meant the enemy knew where you were, could track your movements, and could deliver weapons. The psychological reality of submarine warfare, shaped by the 1943-1945 experience, persisted unchanged. In 1985, 40 years after the war's end, a small gathering of German submarine veterans met informally in the United States. Former U-boat men, some with their families, came to see the nation whose technology had defeated them. Herbert Werner, then 75 and long settled in America, spoke with several veterans about their shared experiences. We came into the war believing in our invincibility beneath the waves. We were taught that the ocean depths protected us, that submerging meant disappearing. For a brief time, this seemed true. Then we encountered your sonar. That sound, that metallic ping striking our hulls, taught us the ocean no longer hid us. We learned fear in a way surface sailors never know. We could not see our enemy, could not fight back, could only wait in darkness while your technology hunted us. We were defeated by science, by engineering, by the capacity of free societies to innovate faster than we could adapt. Those of us who survived did so mostly through luck. We honor our fallen comrades by remembering the truth. We were not supermen in unbeatable machines. We were young men in obsolete submarines sent against technology we could not overcome. The small group listened in silence. Then quiet acknowledgement passed between them, American and German veterans together. Former enemies united in recognition of a transformation that had seemed impossible when those first sonar pings struck German hulls in the early war years. They acknowledged the lesson written in 30,000 submarine graves at the bottom of the Atlantic: technological superiority, combined with industrial capacity and scientific innovation, had proven more decisive than courage, skill, or determination. The German U-boat experience with Allied sonar stands as one of history's clearest examples of how rapidly military technology can shift strategic balance. In 1939, German submarines were essentially invisible when submerged, hunted only through luck or obvious mistakes. By 1944, advanced sonar systems could track submarines continuously, plot their movements in 3 dimensions, and guide weapons with lethal accuracy. The underwater sanctuary had been eliminated through applied science and engineering excellence. For the men who served in U-boats, this technological revolution meant more than tactical defeat. It represented a fundamental psychological transformation. They had entered the war as invisible hunters, confident in their ability to strike and disappear. They finished it as marked prey, constantly detected, perpetually hunted, knowing that the ocean no longer protected them. The sound of sonar pings echoing through their hulls became the audio signature of their obsolescence. The broader strategic impact was equally decisive. Submarine warfare would never again rely on stealth alone. Industrial and technological capacity, scientific innovation, and skilled application of detection systems had rewritten the rules of the deep, leaving a legacy that shaped naval warfare for decades to come. British imports of food and war material, which had fallen to critically low levels by March 1943, recovered dramatically as U-boat effectiveness collapsed. The massive buildup of American forces in Britain for D-Day proceeded without significant interference. The Atlantic supply line, what Winston Churchill later called the only thing that really frightened me during the war, was secure. Germany's bid to strangle Britain through submarine blockade had failed, defeated as much by sonar as by depth charges and aircraft. In the final analysis, the story of German U-boat crews encountering Allied sonar is one of technological surprise, adaptation, failure, and ultimate defeat. German submariners entered the war with justified confidence in their invisibility and ended it as the most casualty-prone military service of any nation. Between those points lay 30,000 individual tragedies, men who drowned in iron coffins at the bottom of the Atlantic, victims of technology they could not counter. The sound that transformed submarine warfare, the metallic ping of sonar pulses striking steel hulls, carried a simple, inescapable message: the ocean no longer hides you. Surface technology can reach into the depths. There is no sanctuary. For German submarine crews, this message arrived too late to save their lives, but early enough to shape submarine doctrine forever. Their experience, bought with 75% casualties, taught the world's navies that underwater warfare had fundamentally changed. Invisibility was no longer assured. Detection was always possible, and in that possibility lay the end of submarine dominance, as 1940 German U-boat commanders had known it. The legacy of those sonar pings echoes still in every submarine that patrols beneath the world's oceans, in every detection system that searches for them, in every doctrine that seeks either stealth or detection. The German U-boat crews who first heard that terrible metallic ringing striking their hulls paid with their lives to teach a lesson that transcends their defeat. Technology transforms warfare faster than training. Doctrine or courage can adapt. Those who fail to recognize technological shifts in warfare do not merely lose battles. They lose entire campaigns, entire wars, and very often their lives. The iron coffins that litter the Atlantic floor hold 30,000 stories of men who learned too late that their ocean sanctuary had been stripped away by science. Their tale stands as a testament to a profound truth. In modern warfare, technological superiority trumps traditional military virtues. The Allied sonar that detected German U-boats proved more decisive than torpedo tubes, more effective than crew courage, more important than a commander's tactical skill. It was the weapon that ended the U-boat threat and secured Allied victory in the Atlantic. For the men who experienced its relentless pinging in the darkness beneath the waves, it was the sound that marked their transformation, from hunter to hunted, from invisible predator to exposed prey, from confident warrior to terrified victim of technology they could not escape.